Hello and welcome to Revive Your Life podcast. I'm your host, Bianca Grace, with a really awesome guest today who is going to teach us a lot about the personal growth cycle that we can go through in order to get from point A to point Z when we're looking to really improve our lives, I think in a very serious way, and what it takes, and actually all the milestones that he had to go through to get there. So I want to welcome Jack to the podcast, and he's somebody that I've worked with for several years, but in that time, he made incredible growth. And it does take time to grow in a meaningful way, but that's what we're trying to bring out today and show everyone is how the process is, where the power is in our self-development and understanding, as well as how it continues on even past when you're done with therapy, when you're you've finished that really like nice arc of a growth cycle and you've made some changes in your life that are instrumental to putting you on a new trajectory. So this is something I don't see a lot of people do in their lives, but I see a lot of people want. So welcome, Jack. I hope that you're able to help us to understand what it is that you feel actually after everything is said and done, kind of like starting from the end. How does it feel to be in a place where you can look back and put the dots together and go, wow, I accomplished all of this and got to this brand new place in my life?
First off, thank you, Bianca, for having me on. This is a pleasure and a joy to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to answer your question, looking back on this 5-year journey, because that's how long it's been. I feel proud of myself. It was a long road, a lot of challenge, a lot of discomfort, a lot of learning about myself. But the end result is I look back on that as, wow, I've done something to your point, not a lot of people have done.
Right.
And I've gotten a sense of accomplishment and freedom, right? I think that's the big takeaway from my work, is that I am now free to do what I want to do with my life, irrespective of what anyone thinks.
Yeah, key. I just want to reflect back a couple of things. I think, again, that is really important for people to understand what the outcome, right? Why do we do anything? We do something for ourselves, even if we're in relationship to others or we're doing something professionally. And I think that that's what really is lost in the beginning is this kind of like grasping for, I want to make the other person happy, or I'm hoping that this is that I'm able to get this to this place or to that place. And we don't even have an understanding of what's going to make us proud, what's going to make us feel free, what's going to make us feel good about ourselves again. And it's such a different place to end up, to be able to say that.
That's right. And it is a stark difference from where I started, right?
Right. Yeah, go into that a little bit, because I think that that's what I was like, the place that you started. Let's lay some groundwork for folks so they know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started working with you in tandem with my partner at the time. And she had, her personal emotional challenges that she was bringing to you to help with. And I was coming from the perspective of, how can I be the most supportive, the best partner, the best provider I can be? Let's look at what I need to work on and, really fulfill that role. And that was my attitude that I brought in here. Like, okay, how do I be the best husband? Right. And that does not answer any questions about who I am. How do I feel? What do I want? What do I need? And so I was coming into this work with you with a totally incorrect perspective.
Right. But that's what's interesting, is that it was that it's that depth of commitment. And I want to point this out early on to folks, is that not a lot of people make this journey complete like you did, because they don't have the perseverance or the commitment to being the best they can be in any area. And that's not to downgrade. I mean, that's something that I've had to work on because it has to do with a way that you possibly coped with or went through your challenges in childhood. You know, if stopping short kept you safe, then that's where you're going to stop. If being small kept you safe, that's where you're going to continue to keep yourself. So I just want to point out that that's something really important, how you showed up, seeing this was energy misdirected, right?
Surely.
To say, okay, how can this person's having an issue? How can I be their best support without thinking about, wait a second, how are their issues possibly interfacing with me? Where do I have emotional needs? How is this affecting me? There was no sense. Now, this is where some people would have a little bit more in this case, but there wasn't a sense of self that was represented at this time. But this type
Yeah.
of energy, right, is
Yeah.
needed to start that developmental process or that self-development process. So
That,
I'm
that's
trying
right.
to draw that out to create a distinction, because if we go back even further, why do you think that you were in a place like this? Why do you think that you ended up in
Oh,
a situation with somebody who was having these types of issues, but you really had to like nurture, support, and change yourself in order to be around them?
sure. I mean, my childhood was pretty challenging.
Mm,
I had a mother that was very self-centered,
mhm,
probably had narcissistic tendencies in retrospect, and she didn't really emotionally engage with me. The only time she gave me any form of attention, I wouldn't even say praise, was when she discovered that I had, high intelligence and I scored high in whatever tests I took.
uh-huh,
And I quickly learned that the way to get validation from my mother
mm,
was to be smart and to prove that I was smart and useful to be in her circle. There's a flip side to this as well.
mhm,
Um, when I was having behavioral issues, and I wouldn't even call it that. I think it was just me emotionally struggling with my parents' divorce because it was in a very dramatic way. My mom cheated on my dad. She went and divorced him. And my father was so, I don't even know what to say. Like, he was totally destroyed by the experience that he packed up everything and moved back to his country of origin.
mm,
And I did not see him for a long time. So I had a pretty selfish mom on one hand, an absent father on the other. So how does a kid survive? To,
mhm,
basically do everything you can to not get on her nerves or to bother her or to be an inconvenience,
mm,
and just do everything you can to be the good son.
mhm,
And it was from a place of fear. It didn't help that, after my father left, I ended up in the foster care system twice, and it was always in response to very minor behavior
mhm.
that I was doing that is totally natural for a kid that was 7 to 9 years old. So I learned very early on that love is conditional,
Mm.
and that I needed to keep my nose clean, stay out of the way and be perfect in order to be accepted. So that's a very constraining, hurtful, self-denying place to grow up in, and then act that way as an adult in relationships.
Yeah. Stay out of the way. You know,
Hmm.
that that is it's so interesting, you know, as you're recalling this, and of course I remember, but it's
Yeah.
still the way that you're talking now, that's obviously you have worked through all of these things, so you're able to talk about them in a
Hmm.
fluid way, but it's how you synthesize something, and how people can hear actually like the idioms that you're using, or the
Yes.
ways that you were thinking about yourself back then.
Hmm.
Those are core self concepts.
Hmm.
Those are ways that you made sense of yourself, that I'm a nuisance, I better stay away, I'm a problem. And and what happens in this case too, when you're trying to get your needs met or to be heard in this situation, how did that go for you as a child?
Um, I mean, in many ways, it didn't. Uh,
Mhm.
the in the I'm immediately identifying with the book No Mr. Nice Guy.
Mhm.
Um, and there's that concept of the covert contract, I think they call it, where if you act in a certain way, you have this implicit expectation that your needs will be met.
Mm.
And so back to my behavior, me getting straight A's, me, being very polite out in public, not doing anything inappropriate. The expectation that I had was that, okay, you're going to care about me and take care of me and treat me with respect. So there was no room
Mm.
really for me to say, I have these needs. Um, can you meet me in the middle and do those things? I didn't have the vocabulary for it. I just knew to act in service.
Right. And that's where I think a lot of people, again, there's in this beginning stage, people don't recognize because it's so ingrained in their makeup. It's meaning it's a schema that was built before you were conscious of the fact it was happening. And
Right.
so now it's just playing itself out. And that's the thing I really hope people start to wake up to, is that if we're in situations in our lives that feel uncomfortable, that feel frustrating, self-denying, all sorts of things, it's most likely we got there from some sort of, we walked into the situation maybe with rose-colored glasses on, or an idealization or some sort of projection, but it was really underneath it all, the way we stay in it past the time where we can see that this isn't right for us.
Right.
It's the same way that we stayed with our parents when we saw that there was something wrong with them or what something's wrong going on here. But you figure out, I thought that's to act in a certain way is to act in alignment with their expectations. You are now, this is where it becomes, I think, kind of frightening. Again, is that the certain way creates this chameleon effect in a child.
Yeah.
And if the child moves out of that, they know they're in the mirror of the parent. If I'm acting in the way that they want me to act, so I'm really allowing them to control me, the fear, it becomes pretty high. I think it's pretty tough. Or they have like a child has an explosive fit in order to shatter the mirror. But then there's all this guilt that comes with it. There's all these emotions that the child has to navigate without any assistance from I don't believe schools handle this well. I don't believe parents handle.
No.
I don't think your friends, like, without any
No.
assistance, their inner world is lost in this thing where they're really trying to stay in this mirror reflection. And this happens with good parents, by the way, parents that are
Sure.
super loving. Everybody's like, sometimes people are like, oh, I had a great childhood. Okay, great, that's wonderful. But probably still some sort of adaptation, or this chameleon effect is taking hold.
Yes. Yes. There was one thing I didn't mention that I think is really important.
Good, yeah.
Um, I cut myself off from my anger.
Mm.
So there were a lot of things that were happening to me that I recognized was very hurtful, but I wasn't really given any room to express them without harsh punishment. So
Mm.
I became very easygoing. And the consequence of that, of course, as you saw plain and clearly, was that I was dealing with depression because, as you said,
Mhm.
depression is aggression turned inward. So I had a very depressive
Mhm.
tendency when I was dealing with these relational struggles, whether it be with my family or with my partner.
So yeah, so let's flip into that. So that's a consequence.
Yes.
So I think that that's where a lot of men and women that listen to this might recognize, ooh, that's me too. I definitely cut myself off from my anger, and then did some, and then now again, like the consequence I didn't know down the road. I know it it helped me to, again, survive and not ruffle feathers or not rock the boat or get through that situation, which again is adaptive in and of itself. But if we don't shift or transfer or start to transition out of that or evolve, that defense mechanism is not going to be healthy down the road, because we
No.
need our anger. Maybe as children it's not so helpful, but now it's very helpful. So meaning that it is a signal that indicates when something's dangerous or when you need to get away from something or to fight something. Like it's a signal we need when a boundary is violated, when our values are violated,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So
Mhm.
that's something that I think I want to go into, is that when did you start kind of waking up to this fact? So this is kind of, your journey started in a very supportive role, acting in certain ways that accommodate the other person's needs and mood states. And then you started recognizing yourself at some point. And I think this depressive part was definitely a large indication that something was off on the inside that you weren't aware of yet.
Right.
Mhm.
I mean, around the depression and how the anger started to come to the surface and I had to reckon with it.
Mhm.
Um, it had a lot to do with the fact that my emotional state as a recovering codependent person, my emotional state was being dictated by whether or not the other person I'm interacting with, whether it be, my partner, my boss,
Mm.
my peers, validated what I was doing. And what I was in like the situations I was in, was that despite all of the effort that I was placing, I wasn't getting that validation all the time.
Mm.
And in my past relationships, very much so. It was actually like a form of manipulation, I would think. Um, and there was a point where I was giving everything of myself to, work, to relationships. And I was starting to recognize that effort being placed and
Mm.
how awesome I was being, in really challenging times.
Mhm.
And for the other person to not recognize it and see it
Mm.
while I'm starting to see it, that
Mm.
spark became an ember, that ember became a flame, that flame became a bonfire, that 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 I had to sit down and look at and say, why am I so angry? And it's because I began to realize through my work with you that I'm a kick-ass partner. I'm a kick-ass, employee, leader, manager, friend, and I
Mhm.
don't deserve to be treated that way. And
Mhm.
I need to do something about it because I'm going to continue to feel this so long as I allow myself to remain in the relationships and work arrangements that I was in.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, because it's the spark of self-recognition,
That's right. That's
is
right.
when you finally started to look back and at everything that you've done, and started to I think you had this process, this minor process of being able to look back and do like a self inventory of your accomplishments, of things that you've done, and that this wasn't all your fault. Like there was a lot of blame that you were allowing yourself to assume in the beginning, that it was your fault. And if you could just try harder, this whole thing about giving everything was the way you were going to make her better and make things better. And you
Yeah.
were like, but wait a second, I've done a lot, and once you do that inventory of really looking back at how much you have done, how much you put yourself out there, whether that's for work, actually, this happens just the same. It just did a little bit less emotional, depth sometimes with the professional stuff. But
Sure.
yeah, that you had some sort of insight into a self that was there, that you're there. And
Mhm.
it wasn't about just doing more of that. Right. So
No.
that was, what did you recognize about, this is kind of the interesting thing though, is what did you recognize about how you were thinking about yourself that was allowing for this to happen for so long? Like that was your coping mechanism. That was your way of relating to yourself in the world, that you had to be this massive overgiver,
Yes.
right? And
Um,
achiever.
it was I mean, yes, having poor self-esteem, but that was hinged
Ah.
on the big lie. For me,
Mhm.
this is the big lie. The big lie is that I am responsible for other people's emotional state. And
Mm.
you know, there there are a lot of people that have inner turmoil that they don't do the work for. And when you're in relationship with them, they will project that all over you. and they will blame you for something that is entirely within themselves and they need to take responsibility for. And I accepted that, when I was in childhood, because I was told by my mother that it was my fault that I went into foster care. And that was a massive injury that was internalized. So I responded to that by being perfect, overworking, proving to everyone that I interacted with, in relationship and friendship and at work, that I am completely spotless. I've done everything I am supposed to do. I've gone above and beyond. I've done all of that stuff. So that way there is no question that I am blameless. But in any moment where things don't go the way that I expect, well, the it's the house of cards starts to tumble down, and I'm thinking really poorly about myself. My inner dialogue was terrible.
Yeah. And, I think that inner dialogue is important to note it. Like, we're going to note into that, because that is this gap between the inner world and outer world that,
Yeah.
So just to point out the outer world again, which is on this one, I mean, I even get emotional. I feel it in my heart when somebody, the big lie. There's such a massive implication when you are told that you're responsible for other people's feelings. And just feeling that from a child's point of view, I just, like, opens me straight on up, because I feel like that is, I want to emphasize, that is that is something that happens to so many people. It's a massive problem in our families and the parenting in our lives that really needs a lot of attention, because children cannot be responsible for an adult's behavior, their emotional state, and so on. So, and neither can your spouse. So even though there are two sides to the coin and we all have to show up and have to have our challenges, it's not about that everybody has to be perfect, but there is a responsibility that comes along with this that is just so absent. And that is a profound step in this work, that once that's recognized, it's not like, oh, well, now it's easy to blame you. No, it's actually, I got a lot of work to do to start being with myself, which this is what this kind of segue into what we were talking about. This facade that we create is how we don't do the work. The perfectionism, the overgiving, the overachiever, the over caregiving, that I take all the responsibility. You can't blame me. But man, that is so, that even though it seems like there would be a lot, it's actually paper. It's thin. It's fragile, right? It doesn't have, because if one person doesn't, and they start to point the finger, or they start to disregard, or this doesn't work out, because everybody loves to blame. So there's going to be finger pointing in the world, no matter what. This shatters.
Yeah.
And that's your work, right? That's where there's just such a discrepancy between, I thought I had it all together. I thought that this was exactly what people wanted, and now it's not. So who's to blame? And that's the inner work, right? Now now let's talk a little bit about what you were thinking about, what you came to mind around your inner talk.
Yeah, I mean, I had my brain wired up in such a way that if someone was mad at me, I would have a somatic response. I would be,
yeah,
like it would be in the pit of my stomach. It would be like doing somersaults instantly, immediately. And I would be thinking like, oh no, I screwed up again. What do I have to deal with this time? And there were moments where I was even more harsh, where it was like intense self-hatred. And there were days where I had a pretty rough argument with my partner at the time, and it drove me to ideation of suicide, because like, oh, if she thinks I'm like this, then and I'm so miserable, day-to-day dealing with this stuff, like I should
Mm.
just end it. That's how far it went.
Mhm.
Um in terms of, my inner dialogue. I was not my own advocate. I was not my cheerleader. I was not my friend.
Mm-mm. And then who was that? Who was that in you?
Yeah, I mean, that was obviously that came from my parents,
Mm.
and in many ways came from, you know, people that I've had past relationships with that were abusive and they were toxic. People that frankly had a lot of personal work that they needed to do. They were dealing with anger, they were dealing with narcissism, they were dealing with hurt, and they weren't doing the work. And so they found me to be a very convenient trash receptacle to put their emotional stuff in.
Mhm.
And because of, my vulnerability, that stuff, I happily accepted it, thinking, oh, yeah, I really need to work on me. I really need to do more. I need to try harder. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, it made me feel like I was repeating things in my head where, you know, like insults that,
Yeah.
yeah, because like I had a stepdad that was like really, really harsh.
Mm.
And I don't think he was really open or prepared to be a father, really. And so I was just an inconvenience because he probably wanted to spend more time with my mom in the house, and I'm just this interloper. Um,
Mm.
so
Mm.
like that, having that treatment repeated, like I'm doing that to myself now, which
Right.
is, tragic. And thank goodness I found the way out.
Yeah, it is, but that's again one of the things I want to, because this is the consequence of not understanding about how our mind works in a lot of ways too, is that, it's important. What you just said was completely accurate, as far as that voice has many different experiences attached to it from a lot of different people over time in your past that were aggressive, that were insulting, that were bullying, that were attacking.
Yep.
Anything that would be a threat in, our modern world. We don't have
Mhm.
bears anymore to come and attack us or whatever. We always
Sure.
use that analogy, but I think that this is the thing, is that the human mind though still does the same thing. If
Mm.
I think something's going to attack me and hurt me, this brings us to this place where it's like, well, I need to know my attacker. I need to know what it sounds like, smells like, in the bushes, rustles, the print of it. I mean, I need to take on a full understanding. And a lot of times what happens is that we don't recognize, especially when it comes to depression, that we have adapted to our aggressor by internalizing them. They are an amalgamation. They are not one thing, and they don't have their own voice. It's something in us that, again, helped us to identify these parameters within these other people that were dangerous. So we weren't in dangerous situations, though, again, not avoidable or not as adaptable in adulthood. But we
Mm.
then take up this, and this is where I think a lot of people with perfectionism, you know, have that very similar issue,
Mm.
is that, there is an inner voice that is unrelenting, that is and is punitive, and it both creates this pressure to perform, but then it also, like, what's the opposite? I think it's depression, where there is this massive almost like it's a kind of a procrastinating. I can't get to it, I can't do it, I have no energy, this complete withdrawal, right? Because otherwise you're in contact with this thing if you're taking on any amount of the responsibility. So, I mean, do you get the other part too? The depression as this withdrawal into away from that inner tyrant?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I am recalling back to where I used to live. I used to live in a townhouse, and I had my own office, and it was this dark room, and I had a futon in there. And I remember just laying down on this futon in the dark, just, for hours, just trying to go inward and escape
Mm-hmm.
from the chaos that was going on in the outside. And it wasn't just like the setting, it was also, my internal condition. I was completely devoid of energy. I was wiped out. It was just like void,
Yeah.
nothing. There's no fight. I think the metaphor that you and I talked about over the years is the wet blanket. Like you're just throwing the wet blanket over me, and I'm just, I'm not moving.
Well, and that's right, because in some ways too, we think about as long as everything is status quo, perfectionism works. As long as everybody's given you the validation of the pedal, it's working. But wait a second, anything that moves out of that space, right? Then here comes this inner tyrant, and you're starting to have a lot of heat. Yeah, you light on fire, like you lost control. You lost control of your outer world. Now let's just add in a whole bunch of people at work and people in your family, which you have no control over, that you,
None.
again, still believing in the big lie. I love that you have any amount of responsibility about how other people feel or control over how people feel.
Right.
That, it's now it's just collapsing. So I think that that's the thing, is that at some point depression is a defense. It's trying to help us to withdraw from that inner world chaos that we think that we could have ever, and anger that we couldn't control, the uncontrollables, which are usually people, or, and I think, again, it's situations I think people manage a little bit better, but people, wow, really, it's a very deep hit. And then this depression is this withdrawal, and this wet blanket puts the fire out. But then when I go to work with somebody in the arc of learning, this is really, I find, a difficult place. It's like, wait a second. So, but we need some fire. We need some spark of understanding how you're annihilating yourself and then withdrawing, to kind of, again, from whatever it is that's happening there, just withdrawing completely. I think other people have different experiences of what that's like inside, but how do we get you back out? So that's the thing, is that, so in this, I mean, going all the way to the edge and back, this is just part of the process. How long did you stay kind of recognizing this part of the work that you had to do? Because this is really personal, right?
It was around a year, and it coincided with the pandemic, and it coincided with the work we did together through analysis. So yeah, we were seeing each other 4 days a week, and you gave me no quarter. Anything that I said, my mannerisms, you looked at, analyzed, and reflected back. And it was like being dunked in a cold pool every day. That was the metaphor that I used, because that was how I learned how to swim. No, that's actually a good memory. But at any rate, it is uncomfortable. And I was being compelled to reckon with many different aspects of myself through this year period. And it was very intense, and it was very challenging. And the one thing that kept me going was that I made one promise to myself explicitly, and to you implicitly, that I'm not getting off this ride. Right. That whatever you're putting in front of me, I'm going to take seriously, and I'm going to think about, and if there is something I need to integrate, I will. If there's an action I should explore and take, I should. And I have. And over that year's time, I started from a place of, not thinking I had any human potential or reservoir inside of myself at bottom, to now having a much clearer understanding of who I am as a person, what I want. I mean, there was a moment I remember that is so poignant to me. I didn't know what I wanted for lunch half the time. Like I knew what people around me wanted, but it's like a Sunday afternoon and it's just me. What do I want for lunch? And I can't answer because I'm paralyzed with, what if I choose wrong? And facing that experience for a year and really exploring it and answering the question, filling in the blank.
What do I want?
yeah, what do I want? I mean, that's my life's big question. What do I
Yeah.
want? Okay, so it was left unanswered for so long.
Right. Well, there was no I, right? There was
No, I didn't
only,
have an eye either.
right. There wasn't an I for,
No.
there was some, I mean, there was a development that was absolutely taking place underlying everything that you were doing. You were the one getting
Yes.
the grades, you were the one learning, you were the one doing the work and all that. You were showing up, and that was accumulating. However, there wasn't the integration of that's me. You
Yeah.
couldn't, that was still for everybody else's you know, their success, their happiness, their provisions, you know, whatever it is, anybody else. So
That's right.
yeah, so there was this connection. I think that two things, and that is that over that year there was this connection between recognizing, like, wait a second, I need to figure out what I want, and that's not easy. That
No.
actually took a long time, and it's not a process. I think it's so funny is that people think like, oh, of course, I just write down what your desires are, what you want, what do you want out of life? And I'm like, wait, if you haven't actually developed a sense of understanding yourself or connected yourself to your interests, this is something that took quite a bit of time to figure out how you're going to come into understanding that. So,
Right.
I mean, it kind of, I wanted, because this was kind of a side note that I really like. How do you think that what was the process of figuring out what you wanted? What was your process?
I mean, I think the big thing is starting to cultivate my imagination,
Hmm.
which was a skill that was very much shut down. I
Hmm.
was thinking about the world in terms of I receive instructions, and within that bounding box, I need to execute on the instructions. And it was always towards, you know, something that someone else wanted.
Mm.
Um, I started to allow myself to think about the possibility of, okay, in a small, it started from the beginning. It's a Sunday afternoon. I am hungry. What do I want for lunch? And that was the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then over time, I started to have to make bigger decisions and building the confidence and realizing here's the big lesson. Um, I'm actually a rather reasonable fellow. I have a good head on my shoulders.
Mm.
And 9 times out of 10, when I make a decision, it's going to go all right because I have enough life experience to know what is good for me and what isn't.
Oh, wow. So you gave yourself credit.
Yeah, I gave myself credit.
You gave
uh,
yourself credit. You didn't look for anybody else to give you credit.
Bingo. And that is the begin. I think that's the seed that
Mhm.
I was starting to, what do I want? Okay, I go and do this. Hey, that was actually pretty good. I had a good idea there. Aha.
Mhm.
Keep that in my head for a little bit. And it, forcing myself to choose and not abdicate my agency and my choice to others, that started to compound.
Right. Because that's the thing, what you're doing, that's the function of caring what other people think or
Yeah,
fearing what other people think.
right.
That what you want doesn't matter, what they want matters. And so, ooh, we're going to get in this. But wait a second, I'm not that, then that gives them control over decisions you make for yourself. This is a no-win situation. This is becomes the irrational, right?
Yeah.
So we just enter into this state where even our minds can't even figure out what's up or down. Like our like our compass is spinning. That's not their decision. It's yours. Please take it back. But it's that's the whole thing, is that we are caught a lot of times, and a lot of people say this, is that
Mhm.
just tell me what to do. Tell me what I want.
Yeah.
You choose and let me just go along with it. And I'm like, wow, deep down, that is a bigger issue,
Hmm.
much bigger, because
Hmm.
that means you're still wired outside in. You're not wired from the inside out yet. And
Right.
when you start to think about, wow, every time, every little thought I have, I'm constantly diverting to outside. I'm thinking about it from the other person's position. That's something that you did quite a bit too. Oh, talking about in some ways as well, like the language you can start to detect from your own language. Listen to how you talk or respond to yourself. Listen to how your thoughts are. Sometimes they completely, I mean, or a lot of times you won't even use the word I. you'll think you're talking inclusively somewhat about yourself, but you're not. And to a person that's listening,
Yeah.
that's a very interesting phenomenon.
It's so funny. I think this is a worthwhile segue. I actually had a dream, because I know we talked about dream interpretations. I
Oh yeah.
actually had a dream where I was being punished or chastised for
Mm.
using the word I
Oh
when
wow.
speaking, right? Like it got
Mhm.
so far that in my psyche, I was playing back this idea that, wow, I don't have the ability to refer to self. There is no self in my existence. It's tough.
Mhm.
It's tough.
Yeah, but I think that that's so with perseverance, you said with complete commitment, and I know some people can't do 4 days a week and all of this, but there was
Right.
something about that that was very healing that I want to mention as well. But
Mm.
it's it's but the idea of committing yourself to this growth and then recognizing what you're doing it for is yourself.
Yeah.
Also, and then the kind of like the reflective quality that we can have, like we have a talk about contrasting experience, kind of seeing that we haven't been doing this for ourselves. We haven't been advocating for ourselves. We have been talking to ourselves in really horrible ways. How do you, yeah, talk about that a little bit as far as how you felt kind of awakening to, yeah, that kind of experience of really being in opposition with oneself or.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for one thing, once I started to get into the awareness, I felt a lot of grief. Like,
Yeah.
wow, I am really running myself into the ground needlessly. This is I am, you know, I'm the type of guy that doesn't like want to hurt people, but I am in violation of my own values because I am hurting myself. And
Uh,
I think it took time for me to realize that if I'm going to truly be a kind person,
mhm,
I am in that collective group of people that I need to be kind to. So it really it did start, from a sense of grief,
mhm,
but not like that depressive stuff.
right.
It just a recognition that, wow, I want to do better. I've caused harm to myself, and I don't want to do that anymore.
Mhm.
Um,
In sacrifice of what? So I think that this is where, again, like kind of to move towards, at what point when you recognize that and the eye starts to build, and this, what did you do process wise in order to develop yourself? Where were some of the key things that you felt like you were doing, like maybe,
uh,
activities, books, interests that you took up, like, so once you recognize that you were no longer going to just be a partner and and
yeah.
provider, that you were going to actually do something for yourself that created, an idea of, oh, me, what do I want? Then
Mhm.
you go into this phase of developing what you want. So this is actually, once your emotional worth is up to a certain level, you can start that work.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it was like in the beginning of the pandemic, people were starting to pick up hobbies. People were baking bread. Everyone was picking up stuff to do with their spare time. I
Mm-hmm.
picked up electronic music. Now, as you know, I've been listening to electronic music since I was like a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
Tears for Fears and Depeche Mode and all of that, and now like the festival stuff. But I started to purchase equipment and learn how it worked and made music.
Mm.
And started to learn how to live perform. And I'm doing this in my little office in the duplex I was living in at the time when I was married.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, I was building confidence because I was like, wow, 3-4 months ago, I didn't know anything about how synthesizers worked or how MIDI worked or any of that nerdy stuff.
Wow.
And now I know quite a bit about it, and I can put equipment together and I can start making music, and you've heard it and it's cool, and I heard it and I love it. Like it's really awesome to take an idea and convert it into something that can be heard.
Mm.
Um, and
Mm-hmm.
that built a lot of confidence because I was doing it for my own pleasure, right?
Right.
It wasn't about, oh, I'm gonna go make stuff and people have to approve of it. I'm like, hey, that sound was really crazy. That's cool. You know, like just having
Yeah.
those small, the small incremental growth
Yeah.
spurts when you're picking up something new every time. But I think that was like the genesis of me understanding that there is a life in existence outside of the roles, the manager role, the partner role, the good son role. You know, this was, I mean, having fun role.
Yeah, and that is the key, is that you have to step out of the role into yourself and then start to explore your interests. And I think whether that's through your body, I also
Yeah.
think being able to, pick things that feel good to eat, move your body in ways that feel good, exploring anything to you that feels good, like actually
Yes.
saying, okay, this is something I can get into, feels good to me. I would love to share it if people want, to know, but it's not about, what their effect, what it will have, how it will affect them. I'm not trying
That's right.
to affect anyone.
That's
And
right.
and that, I think that you did quite a bit of that. I mean, as far as reading books, doing personal development work on the side, um,
Yeah.
doing even activities like going out and camping because you haven't before, and stuff. There was just things that you did, that you took initiative to go do something different with your time.
Right.
And it was always a growth process. You even did parasailing,
Yeah, paragliding. Yes,
paragliding.
I did. Yeah. So for listeners, Bianca challenged me.
Yeah.
And like I said, anything she puts in front of me, I'm gonna take seriously. She's like, do something risky with your body. Right? Like
Yeah.
I want you to feel in your body the fear and the risk.
Mhm.
Um, and my mind went immediately to the air. So literally 2 weeks
Yeah.
later, I was in Vermont running off of a mountain with a tandem pilot, and flew. You know, it was just a few minutes because we couldn't do the cross country thing because of the wind and the thermals, but whatever. I was up in the freaking sky.
Yeah.
There was like a highway beneath me, and I'm seeing cars and I'm seeing birds and the wind blowing through my hair. It was awesome.
Yeah.
And I then started to take classes.
Mm.
Um, and I got my first level training in paragliding, and it required you to run off of a 250-foot high hill,
Yeah.
navigate, have your flight plan, and land successfully. And yeah, sure, you have somebody on the radio telling you what to do, but it is you.
Yeah.
It is you. That's going to bring you back home safely. And that built an immense amount of confidence in a
Right.
very short period of time, because that was trial by fire.
Well, but that's the point, is that the self-development part isn't just an intellectual exercise. I mean,
No.
people can get into stoicism and all that stuff, and that's fine. But no, it's actually, take it all the way to the bank with behavior, with trying new things, with putting yourself out there, obviously in ways that, again, you feel connected to. That was your choice to go to the air, to fly. Like, we could have, the possibilities are, endless, but there is something about behavior, how you are moving your body, how you are showing up for yourself, how you're feeling, how you're sleeping. All of these things actually start to develop a sense of awareness around yourself that is not selfish, but completely, your body tells your brain, we're doing this. You have to have all attention inward right now. And that attention inward then is is very stimulating to get
Mhm.
somebody wired from the inside out. How do we do that? By just doing the same thing and hoping, like, intellectually I can convince my partner to see me. No, we have
Right.
to see ourselves. We have to behave in ways that show that we have a body, even that we have, and it's connected to us in a very specific way. So I really, this is, when somebody puts something down in front of you, you obviously think about it. But that was one of the things that you do, again, is so well, as if anybody wants change, They've got to be able to challenge themselves to do the thing from A to Z,
Yeah.
and that means like if you want to go camping, but you've never done it before, get cold. Okay. Now, next time you'll figure it out. Now, this time it was better. Like, keep doing it, keep trying. And that, again, you don't give up on yourself this way. So I think that I'm just trying to, again, bring out that this is such an important part, even though we do a lot of talking and a lot of work inward, the
Right.
body is absolutely tied to self-development. It is the thing we cut ourselves off from.
That's right. Especially
And
for me.
right, especially for depression, for anything where we have to just completely immobilize ourselves in order to escape the chaos, right?
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and so just kind of thinking about, we're going to kind of wrap it up a little bit here as towards the end, because this is now you've taken all these steps, you've gone this distance, and
Mhm.
now there's something around, I think this is the one of the most important parts of developing a sense of self is being able to make a decision for oneself that leads to kind of that ultimate, especially in relationships. So in
Yeah.
healing your relationship with yourself,
Mhm.
doing cool things, reading, investing in yourself, starting to build this understanding and living it. But then we have these relationships that we got into when we didn't have one, when we
Right.
were really unwell ourselves.
Mhm.
And so how does this translate? How do you stay in something like that? How do you feel about what happened at some point for yourself? Because I think this is where people do, like, they'll do all of this work, but they won't make a decision, and then will regress back into whatever that relationship requires. So, because I help people in a similar situation, and sometimes they can't make it all the way through.
Right. I mean, from retrospect, I think the barrier I had between me and ending my marriage was fear of what. So there's a known set of problems,
Right.
but when you exit that relationship, you are now accepting a wild unknown. And I think in the early period, there was a lot of fear on my part that if I followed through with this, would I be okay?
Hmm.
Um, would I be able to handle it? How much discomfort am I going to deal with as part of this choice? And there was a point in my feeling and thinking where I realized that the alternative would have been far worse. It is better for me to go out into the unknown and deal with whatever's out there than to stay and be miserable. And as I continue to do work with you and have a reflective surface to better understand my experience, I begun to realize that I am not happy. The situation isn't changing. Um, it's nothing I can change, and there's very little that I can actually take responsibility for and affect. So, it's time for me to go. So that was, the mental frame of mind that I had to have, and the emotional frame of mind I had to have, and
Hmm.
having access to some aggression where I can actually go do the thing.
Right. Which is that is the frame. You have to be able to have like a blueprint for an idea of yourself that's
Mhm.
still more important than taking responsibility for somebody else's feelings or taking
Right.
on something that you can't affect anymore. But there is that deep introspection about how it is. I know I'm going to cross over a barrier or a fear barrier that is, again, like leaping off 250 whatever foot cliff. It's really that frightening to go from codependency to independent, to
Yeah.
take that step from I know that I have been thinking about myself in relationship to other people's happiness, and now that has shifted so much. I am now in my body and my mind. I'm what's important too. Like, other people do matter, but if you can't be effective and at helping them at any way, shape, or form to come around to some sort of understanding about what their responsibility is for their own happiness, then you have to make, yes, at some point, it's like if you don't make that determination, if you don't at some point determine that this is where I need to go in my life, which is away from this in order to maintain this growth, like we've grown in different directions, then you will have to regress back to center, and that growth becomes, again, just something like, again, it's like losing a bunch of weight and then gaining it back,
Yeah.
So, and some people do this. I mean, but there is this, because so you have to be able to jump off that cliff and recognize, I trust myself that I'm going to land on 2 feet. I trust my life experience that I can figure out what I want and how to go ahead and get it. I'm a good person. I'm going to be out in the world. I can take ownership of my life for me, and I believe in myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that belief in oneself is just, I think that's what, as a human being, not even as a therapist, is that what is that I really do in my work is I reflect that back. I see so much potential, right? And the essence that's hiding inside or is afraid to come out, or is, and keep on looking at that throughout the work and just continue to nurture that part, because it has personality. It has its own beingness, imagination. And it's like, you can do it. You can do it. I believe in you. And then as soon as you say that back to yourself, that's when decisions can be made, real decisions for yourself. And, it's not that every decision you make is supposed to just lead to some sort of like perfect place again. Perfection is done by that point. Yeah. It's a decision where you say, I believe in myself enough to start taking steps forward in the rest of my journey.
Mm-hmm.
I just keep on and now maybe on that next journey will be the possibility of stepping towards a much more healthy relationship. One where you're not cleaning up the mess, but one where you're actually using your communication skills and your personal values, and and what your intimacy needs really are now, and all sorts of cool things. Like, you get to go into the world with this new renewed, like, I think, a more authentic sense of self, to be honest. I think this is what's underneath it all.
For sure. And these days the bar's high. I know who I am more and more every day, and I know I offer a lot in a friendship and in a relationship, and I these days expect reciprocity.
Mm-hmm. And you get it, right?
Yeah,
And
I do get it. I do get it. I since my major life transition, I've made wonderful friends at places like music festivals, and at places like meetups, and I've met wonderful men and women, and it's been lovely. So that's my new normal. I don't allow for any less to enter my life, because I realize that my life and vitality and my time and my energy and my care is a gift, and I spend it wisely.
Right. And there are people out there that'll match that. I think that's another fear, is that when we're on that wavelength of fear-based thinking, of outside in, of responsible for other people, we're literally attracting that. And so it's a very scary place to come outside of that place and go, okay, I'm ready to socialize now, even though that might be a good idea to try with amongst new, like people that you meet in groups that you're interested in. Maybe not your direct family, if that's, where you're having problems. But I still say, it's like, wait a second. Don't be afraid that you're just going to be alone. There are ways outside of that, in friendships, that this lifestyle was so isolative and so restrictive. I recognize people that are able to make a decision, and really it's not it's more about not to end a relationship, but more to live your life in alignment with your values and with an idea of yourself that's respectful and loving towards yourself. That's what the decision really was.
It was. I placed myself first for the first time.
And that's an incredible thing to do. And you continue to do that. And it doesn't mean selfishness, and it doesn't mean anything other than, like living your life on a whole new level, and people are going to meet you there. It's reciprocity. I like that word. Yeah. So
Thank you.
any closing thoughts? Are you thinking that you didn't get to say, or?
Oh, that's really interesting. Of course I have notes before before this thing. So just to give your listeners like a view into what my life is now, like in the
Right.
forefront. Last week I was in Death Valley and I had my first off-roading experience, and I drove 12 miles by myself through the desert back to civilization, and
That's awesome.
it was the most beautiful experience. I'm a nomad.
Mm-hmm.
I run my own business, and I live a life of freedom. I wake when I want to wake. I work when I want to work. I hang out who I want to hang out with, and it's been an amazing journey. And I have this woman to thank for opening my eyes to what's going on inside here and inside here and inside all this. Thank you,
Right.
Bianca.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. You're a star, and being able to like go the whole way. Again, it's such a joy to work with somebody that is committed, again, as yourself, to going the path, of getting on the path. And you still are. You don't need my help to stay on the path anymore. The path meaning to, again, continued development, enrichment, and living your life the way you want to, and having new experiences that create like actually a fulfillment, right? That was not there. And it's not about the purpose being that I perform a role. So I think it's amazing to see all of this unfold over time. So I wanted to share it because again, the way that I was able to help you with this was the way that you were able to accept the help and know. And I think that's that vulnerability, and know that it's time to trust, and I'm ready to take
Yeah.
this journey, and I'm strong enough to do it. And I will stick with it.
That's right.
Everything meaningful in life happens this way. So even within our personal development, we can actually shift it. I think people need that inspiration, because it's not as easy to see sometimes as maybe
No.
if you have some sort of like tangible type of journey that you're on. But this is very, very real. And thank you for sharing that. It was awesome. I completely appreciate all of your openness and everything you shared in your insight too. It's a lot.
It's a joy and a pleasure, Bianca. Thanks so much for having me. Long time
Absolutely.
coming.
Yes. And I might have you on again for other topics, because this might be the way to go.
Looking
Okay.
forward to it.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Share this if you would like. Bye-bye.